Welcome to Two Stories podcast.
Capital moves, well, it moves at the speed of light.
Yeah, it really does.
Right. I mean, long before diplomats even draft their statements or, long before the dust literally settles from a geopolitical shock.
The money's already gone.
Exactly. Financial algorithms have already rerouted billions of dollars, instantly pricing in this completely new global reality.
It's incredible to watch, honestly.
It is. And we saw this play out in real time with the event we're diving into today. You, our listener, are basically watching a real-time stress test of the global economy.
A massive one, yeah.
Triggered by the sudden removal of this deeply entrenched concentration of power. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, our mission is to unpack a really seismic event. We want to explore how those initial shockwaves travel through the international system to affect absolutely everything.
Right, from multinational supply chains all the way down to, the inflation data that dictates your daily cost of living.
Yeah, your grocery bills, your gas. And the speed of that capital flight you mentioned, it's kind of the perfect metric for the severity of the shock, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, we often conceptualize world events as taking place in these isolated political silos.
Yeah.
But the global architecture is just this highly sensitive, hyper-connected web.
Yeah, everything touches everything else.
Exactly. A violent shift in a regional power dynamic, it instantly alters the fundamental risk calculus for, a cargo ship captain navigating a strait.
Or a portfolio manager in London.
Right. Or even a manufacturer waiting on components in Ohio.
It's all connected, and the source material we're pulling from today illustrates that cascade perfectly.
It's a very detailed briefing.
Yeah, we're analyzing an intelligence and economic briefing that details a massive geopolitical rupture. Specifically, the reported death of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Right.
According to our sources, and this is confirmed by Iranian media, he was killed in joint U.S.-Israel airstrikes.
A truly historic turning point.
Huge. And our briefing focuses explicitly on this event and the cascading economic, logistical, and, global trade fallout unfolding in its wake.
There's a lot to cover there.
There is. But before we get into the mechanics of those ripple effects, I do need to pause and make something crystal clear to you, our listener.
Yeah, this is important to state up front.
It really is. Because our source material covers highly sensitive and politically charged geopolitical conflicts, this deep dive is completely impartial.
We are not taking sides.
Exactly. We are not taking sides, and we are not endorsing the viewpoints or actions described in our sources.
No endorsements at all.
Right. Our sole goal today is to impartially convey the facts and analysis from the original text so you can understand the economic and global trade implications.
We're looking at this exclusively through the lens of structural impact, market mechanics, and global logistics.
Just the data.
Yeah, examining the direct cause and effect of the data we have in front of us, stripping away the rhetoric to look at the underlying economic machinery.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the epicenter of the event itself and the mechanical nature of the power vacuum it creates.
The power vacuum is the key here.
Right. Our sources point out that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei wielded ultimate authority over Iran's politics, its military apparatus, and its foreign policy for over 36 years.
Since 1989.
Yeah, since 1989. That's a lifetime.
And understanding the architecture of that 36-year rule is crucial because, this is not a conventional political transition.
No, not at all.
In many Western democracies, administrations turn over. But the underlying civil service, the bureaucratic state, it remains largely insulated.
Right, the machinery keeps humming along.
Exactly. Iran's power structure operates entirely differently. Khamenei wasn't just the executive. He was the ultimate arbiter among these fiercely competing factions.
Like who?
Well, you have the traditional Shiite clerics, the civil government, and the immensely powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC.
Wow, okay, so removing that central node doesn't just create a vacancy.
No. It shatters the balancing mechanism that kept all those competing power centers in check.
So instead of looking at this like a standard government, a better way to conceptualize it is to imagine a company suddenly losing a CEO who was also the founder, the board of directors, and the chief operating officer all at once.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
But, this highly complex, compartmentalized syndicate has factions that deeply distrust one another.
Right, they're fierce rivals.
And for nearly 4 decades, there was only one centralized node that had the authority to route decisions and settle internal disputes.
And when that singular node is deleted instantly,
You don't get a smooth handover.
you get a real-time, multifactional scramble for absolute control.
And the stakes of that scramble are astronomical, right? Because of the dual nature of these factions.
Yeah, the IRGC is the perfect example of that dual nature. They aren't simply a branch of the armed forces.
They're way more than that.
Oh, absolutely. Over the decades, they've morphed into this massive economic conglomerate. They control vast sectors of the Iranian economy.
Like what kind of sectors?
Everything from telecommunications and construction to, well, illicit financial networks designed to bypass international sanctions.
Oh, wow. So they basically run the economy.
Pretty much. So a succession crisis here isn't just about who commands the military. It is fundamentally a hostile corporate takeover of a nation's economy.
A hostile takeover, yeah.
The faction that seizes control dictates the distribution of national wealth and the future of international trade relations.
And that structural ambiguity, that's what sends those algorithmic tripwires I mentioned earlier into overdrive.
Exactly. Markets hate ambiguity.
Right. Markets can price in bad news. They can price in hostile administrations. What markets cannot price in is absolute ambiguity regarding who holds the launch codes and who controls the shipping lanes.
Which logically brings the immediate crisis right to the coastline.
The Persian Gulf.
Yeah, because the factions currently maneuvering for control inside Tehran aren't operating in a geographic vacuum. They sit directly on the northern coast of the Persian Gulf.
Wielding direct military influence over the Strait of Hormuz.
Precisely.
Let's look at the sheer physics of that choke point for a second, because we aren't just talking about a busy shipping lane.
It's the most critical artery in the world.
Yeah. Roughly 1/3 of the world's seaborne oil trade is forced to transit through there. It's the primary outbound valve for Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and Iraq.
The daily capacity limits are just staggering.
Well over 20 million barrels of oil traversing this remarkably narrow channel every single day. And frankly, the backup options are severely limited, right?
Very limited.
Yep.
You look at alternatives like the East-West pipeline in Saudi Arabia, which moves oil to the Red Sea.
Right.
But the physical infrastructure simply does not have the pipeline capacity to absorb the massive volume of crude that relies on the Strait of Hormuz.
So it has to go through the water.
It has to.
Mm-hmm.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see the immediate mechanics of global market panic.
The panic is palpable.
The critical piece of the puzzle here is the maritime insurance industry. Specifically, syndicates like Lloyd's of London and the Joint War Committee.
Okay, how do they fit in?
Well, the commodities market doesn't wait for an oil tanker to actually be struck by a missile to react. The reaction is driven by actuarial math.
Basically just assessing the risk of something happening.
Exactly. When an event of this magnitude shatters the geopolitical equilibrium, the Joint War Committee expands its high-risk designations.
Okay.
And the moment that happens, standard maritime insurance policies for vessels entering the Persian Gulf are functionally voided.
Wait, voided in entirety.
Voided unless the shipping companies purchase specific war risk premiums.
Wow. Okay, I want to push back on the timeline here, playing the skeptic for a moment on behalf of the listener.
Sure.
If it's just actuarial fear and risk algorithms driving the initial shock, isn't there a lag time? I mean, before the ships actually stop physically moving, aren't Wall Street commodities traders just capitalizing on the headlines to bid up crude futures? Are the ships actually stopping yet?
The commodities traders are absolutely bidding up futures based on anticipated supply constraints, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the physical stoppage happens remarkably fast.
Really? Why so fast?
Because the profit margins in global shipping are incredibly tight. Imagine a modern supertanker carrying over $100 million worth of crude.
Okay.
When a war risk premium jumps from a fraction of a percent to, say, 2 or 3% of the vessel's total hull value overnight.
That's a massive jump.
It is. That single premium can cost millions of dollars for a single voyage. In many cases, that instantly wipes out the economic viability of the trip.
Oh, I see.
So the route is effectively closed by the invisible hand of the insurance market before a single military blockade is ever established.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the moment those routes become financially unviable, you trigger what supply chain experts call the bullwhip effect.
The bullwhip effect, exactly.
It's like a massive global traffic jam. Yeah. It's not just about taking a detour. When standard maritime transit through the Middle East becomes too dangerous or too expensive, these massive cargo ships are forced to avoid the Suez Canal entirely.
They have to take the scenic route, so to speak.
Right. They have to divert all the way around the continent of Africa, navigating the Cape of Good Hope.
And the cascading math of that diversion is brutal.
It's got to take way longer.
Rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope adds roughly 10 to 14 days to a one-way transit between Asia and Europe.
2 extra weeks.
Yeah. But the hidden cost there isn't just the extra transit time or the millions of dollars in extra fuel burn. It is a fundamental disruption of global vessel capacity.
Right, because if every ship's journey suddenly takes 30% longer, you effectively need 30% more ships globally just to move the exact same amount of cargo.
Exactly.
And the global fleet doesn't just have 30% excess capacity sitting idle.
No, they don't. And that is the core mechanism of the supply chain shock. A shortage of vessels means a shortage of empty shipping containers at the origin ports in Asia.
So things just pile up.
They pile up, and freight rates skyrocket. Suddenly, a manufacturing plant in Germany is forced to idle its assembly lines because a critical microchip is, well, floating somewhere off the coast of South Africa instead of arriving on time.
Wow. And this constrained supply meeting steady demand acts as a massive inflationary force, right?
A huge one. Those exorbitant freight rates and delayed manufacturing costs are baked right into the final wholesale price.
Which is eventually passed directly on to the consumer, to you listening right now.
Exactly.
And as the physical supply chains are violently rerouting around the African continent, the financial supply chains are doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, capital flight.
Right. The capital flight isn't just a metaphor. It is a measurable drain on emerging markets. Foreign direct investment, or FDI, practically freezes.
And the paralysis of that foreign direct investment is one of the most damaging long-term consequences of this kind of geopolitical shock.
Walk me through that.
Well, let's say a multinational conglomerate was finalizing a 10-year, multi-billion-dollar investment to build a manufacturing hub in a developing nation.
Okay, a big long-term bet.
Right, and let's say that nation is highly dependent on imported energy. When the apex of Iranian power collapses and the Strait of Hormuz is threatened, that conglomerate's long-term risk models completely break down.
They can't predict anything anymore.
They can no longer forecast their energy input costs for the next decade. They can no longer guarantee the reliability of their maritime export routes.
Because the geopolitical roulette wheel is just violently spinning.
Precisely. Businesses refuse to make long-term financial bets under those conditions.
So they hit the brakes, they pull that capital out of the vulnerable emerging market and deploy it into safe havens.
Flight to safety, yeah.
They buy U.S. treasuries, they buy gold, or they retreat into historically stronger currencies. And the emerging market loses the infrastructure, the jobs, and the technological transfer.
All because they power vacuum thousands of miles away.
It's wild. And that capital remains frozen because the global market is waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Waiting for the next data point in the sequence, yeah. The nature of the retaliation.
Because our analytical briefing highlights that Iran has pledged retaliation for the airstrikes.
They have. And a localized, proportional military response is one scenario. But the pledge raises the specter of a much broader, sustained, asymmetric regional conflict.
Which threatens everything.
It threatens to tear up existing regional trade agreements and drag neighboring states, who, by the way, host significant multinational operations directly into the crossfire.
Which accelerates the geopolitical chessboard. The sources note swift international condemnations and emergency diplomatic channels opening up.
Oh yeah, lots of diplomatic talk.
But the subtext here is the escalation of great power competition, right? The United States, China, and Russia are not passive observers in this.
Definitely not passive. China, for instance, relies heavily on uninterrupted energy flows from the Persian Gulf to fuel its manufacturing base.
So they're deeply invested in the outcome.
Deeply. And Russia has its own complex military and economic ties with Tehran.
So that triangulated relationship is vital to monitor.
Very vital. How Beijing and Moscow respond to the succession crisis, the retaliatory strikes, will dictate whether this remains a contained regional crisis or if it expands into a proxy confrontation that fractures global trade into distinct opposing blocs.
Wow. And it all circles back to the internal struggle in Tehran we discussed earlier.
It does.
So what does this all mean? Like, if we look at the internal succession and the IRGC decides to essentially bypass the traditional clerical establishment and solidify a hardline military-first dictatorship,
Which is a real possibility.
does that fundamentally lock the global economy into a state of entrenched hostility? Does it eliminate the off-ramps for new diplomatic negotiations and basically guarantee that these risk premiums become permanent fixtures of the global economy?
This raises an important question, and it is the exact dilemma currently dominating the risk assessments of major central banks right now.
Really? Central banks are looking at this.
Oh, intensely. If a hardline military faction consolidates absolute control, the probability of returning to the negotiating table regarding, say, nuclear development or regional proxies approaches zero.
The door is just shut.
Shut tight. You transition from a temporary geopolitical spike to a period of sustained structural hostility. And the best way to determine if that shift is permanent is to actually watch how central banks adjust their monetary policy.
I'm really glad you brought up central banks because the connection between a power vacuum in Tehran and like the interest rate on a 30-year mortgage in the United States isn't immediately obvious to everyone.
It's a few steps removed.
Walk us through how central banks price the specific type of geopolitical risk.
Sure. So central banks, like the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank, they are constantly trying to differentiate between transitory shocks and structural shifts.
Okay, what's the difference?
A transitory shock is like a hurricane temporarily shutting down a refinery. Prices spike, the refinery gets fixed, prices normalize.
It passes.
Right. But if central banks determine that the political shift in Iran has permanently altered the availability and cost of energy flowing out of the Middle East, they have to treat that as structural inflation.
It's baked into the new reality.
Exactly. To combat structurally higher energy costs that seep into the price of all goods, central banks are often forced to keep interest rates higher for a much longer period.
Just to suppress broader economic demand.
You got it.
They intentionally cool down the domestic economy to offset the inflationary heat radiating from the geopolitical crisis.
Furthermore, you have to watch the international sanctions policy.
Right, because the U.S. and Europe will react.
Yeah. If the United States, Europe, and their allies respond to an IRGC consolidation by rapidly expanding and hardening secondary economic sanctions, meaning they penalize anyone, anywhere in the world who does business with Iran.
That's a huge deal.
It signals they're preparing for a long-term economic war of attrition. Those secondary sanctions force global corporations to painstakingly audit their entire supply chains to ensure zero exposure.
Which has to add massive compliance costs.
Massive costs, and it further slows down global commerce.
It is truly staggering when you lay out the entire mechanical chain of causality.
It really is quite the domino effect.
Yeah. You start with a joint airstrike and the sudden deletion of a 36-year absolute ruler. That creates a multifactional scramble for $1 trillion national economy.
Yep.
That scramble threatens the physical capacity of a maritime choke point. That threat triggers actuarial algorithms in London, which spike insurance premiums, which force global shipping fleets to detour around Africa.
And then the boats are late.
Right. That detour causes a global shortage of cargo space, which spikes freight rates, driving up the cost of manufacturing components. And finally, central banks look at that imported inflation and decide to keep your interest rates elevated.
A straight line from the Persian Gulf to your wallet.
It directly connects the power dynamics over there to the purchasing power of your paycheck.
The interconnectedness is just absolute. Every action forces a reaction, and the friction generated at each step of that sequence manifests as a cost.
A literal dollar amount.
Exactly. While our briefing provides a highly detailed map of the immediate tactical fallout, the oil futures, the rerouting of TEU capacities, the capital flight, there's a much broader systemic implication that we need to evaluate.
I always appreciate when we can pull the lens back. Beyond the immediate supply chain whip effect and the central bank yields, what is the ultimate macro-level consequence that maybe isn't explicitly spelled out in the daily security briefings?
Well, think about this. If the global trade architecture and energy markets are so intensely fragile that a single flashpoint one political vacuum intersecting with one maritime choke point can paralyze supply chains and dictate global inflation, we have to question the viability of the current model.
Wow, yeah.
Could this historic shock serve as the ultimate catalyst that forces sovereign nations to permanently abandon the vulnerability of hyper-globalized supply chains?
Just pull back from globalization entirely.
Could this be the moment that governments and mass conglomerates decide the risk is simply too great, rapidly accelerating a retreat toward localized manufacturing and totally independent domestic energy grids?
That is a fundamental rewiring of the last 50 years of human commerce.
It really is.
Because for decades, the entire global system has been obsessively optimized for efficiency and cheap labor.
Just-in-time manufacturing.
Exactly. It relied on the assumption that the oceans would always be safe and the energy would always flow. But when the pursuit of absolute efficiency results in catastrophic systemic vulnerability, the governing philosophy has to change.
It has to adapt.
You are suggesting we're entering an era where security permanently overrules efficiency.
It is the transition from just-in-time to just-in-case.
Just in case. I like that.
Yeah, building redundant, localized supply chains and domestic energy infrastructure is incredibly expensive in the short term. But it might be the only way to insulate a national economy from the kind of algorithmic panic and capital flight we're witnessing right now.
Right.
The shockwaves from Tehran might just be the death knell for the era of unbridled globalization.
That is a profound paradigm shift to consider. We began this deep dive by looking at the instantaneous speed of capital flight when a nation's central pillar of power is removed.
The money always moves first.
Always. And as we have explored today, the mechanics of the global economy guarantee that the resulting shockwaves will travel through every port, every central bank, and every local market on Earth.
Including your own neighborhood.
Yeah. The daily news cycle will continue to barrage you with fast-moving headlines and political rhetoric, but taking the time to truly understand these underlying mechanisms, the actuarial math, the supply chain physics, the central bank risk models, is the only real way to cut through the noise.
It's the only way to see the board clearly.
It is the true shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. Thank you so much for joining us and exploring these complex causal links today. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking for the mechanical why behind the what, and we will be right here with you to unpack the next one.